The nursery door stood slightly ajar, the polished brass latch untouched. A single small toy lay on the floor, out of place, too precise to be accidental. I paused, fingers brushing the log tablet, noticing the previous entry was missing. A faint, stifled whimper reached me from inside. Everything in the corridor was silent, the usual hum absent. Instinct whispered danger. The corridor outside the nursery carried a stillness that did not belong to that hour, a flat quiet that pressed against the guard's ears as he advanced with measured steps, boots barely disturbing the polished stone. Morning light filtered through the high windows at a shallow angle, catching dust motes that hung suspended, untouched by the usual circulation of staff. He noticed the door before he reached it, not wide, not careless, but open by a few inches, the brass handle resting at an angle inconsistent with protocol. Nursery doors were logged, checked, sealed. He stopped short of the threshold, eyes tracking the line of the door, the shadow it cast across the floor. A small wooden toy horse lay just inside, its paint dulled by use, one wheel turned inward as if nudged aside rather than dropped. Toys were never left in the entryway. Attendants were precise to the point of ritual. He crouched slowly, not touching anything, letting his gaze absorb the scene. The floor was clean, recently polished, carrying a faint citrus scent, but the toy's position suggested movement after the cleaning. His hand moved to the log tablet clipped inside his jacket. The previous shift's entry was missing, not incomplete, absent. The time block showed a clean gap where a signature and biometric confirmation should have been. He straightened, pulse steady, breathing controlled, and listened. From inside the nursery came no sound at all. No soft hum of the environmental system, no movement, no child's restless stir. Silence in that place was wrong. Protocol dictated he announce himself and wait for clearance. Instinct urged him to observe longer. He glanced once down the corridor. The camera's indicator lights glowed steady, red, recording, yet their coverage did not extend fully into the room. He adjusted his stance, placing himself just outside the door's swing, and leaned enough to see the edge of the interior. The curtains were half drawn, light diffused into a muted gray. Furniture sat precisely aligned, too precise, as if reset in haste. His fingers brushed the radio but did not activate it. Any call would register, would ripple outward before he understood the shape of what he was seeing. The toy horse, the missing log, the door, each detail alone was explainable. Together they formed a pattern he had learned not to ignore. He waited, counting seconds, letting the quiet stretch, feeling the faint chill rising from the stone floor through the soles of his boots, aware that once he crossed the threshold, the morning would no longer remain ordinary. He entered without sound, easing the door wider with 2 fingers, careful to leave it exactly where it had been, and the nursery revealed itself in layers rather than all at once. The temperature was slightly lower than standard, the climate system dialed down by a degree or 2, enough to notice on exposed skin. A rocking chair stood still beside the window, its position subtly altered, angled toward the crib instead of the wall. The guard moved along the perimeter, eyes level, registering reflections in the glass, the placement of objects, the absence of an attendant where one should have been. Near the crib, a folded blanket rested on the floor, not dropped, but set down, edges aligned too neatly for a child's hand. He stopped again, this time closer, and listened. There was breathing, small, controlled, deliberately quiet. The child was awake. The guard did not approach immediately. He scanned the room for signs of recent presence, a faint crease in the carpet near the wardrobe, a chair drawn back an inch farther than regulation allowed, the nursery monitor angled away from the crib by a fraction. None of it suggested chaos, all of it suggested intention. His jaw tightened imperceptibly as he stepped into the child's line of sight. Prince George sat upright, blanket clutched to his chest, eyes fixed not on the guard, but on the door behind him, as if measuring distance. The guard lowered himself slightly, maintaining space, offering no sudden movement. He did not speak. He did not need to. The child's grip loosened just enough to show the tension had been noticed. The guard's gaze returned to the room, tracing the path someone would have taken to enter, to stand, to leave. The absence of the log entry pressed heavier now, no longer an administrative error, but a deliberate omission. He activated his body camera without sound, the internal system logging the time automatically, and adjusted his position so the lens captured the doorway, the child, and the surrounding space. Protocol required immediate reporting of irregular access. Protocol also required certainty. He had neither proof nor accusation yet, only a convergence of details that refused to settle. He waited, counting seconds, letting the quiet stretch, feeling the faint chill rising from the stone floor through the soles of his boots, aware that once he crossed the threshold, the morning would no longer remain ordinary. He entered without sound, easing the door wider with 2 fingers, careful to leave it exactly where it had been, and the nursery revealed itself in layers rather than all at once. The temperature was slightly lower than standard, the climate system dialed down by a degree or 2, enough to notice on exposed skin. A rocking chair stood still beside the window, its position subtly altered, angled toward the crib instead of the wall. The guard moved along the perimeter, eyes level, registering reflections in the glass, the placement of objects, the absence of an attendant where one should have been. Near the crib, a folded blanket rested on the floor, not dropped, but set down, edges aligned too neatly for a child's hand. He stopped again, this time closer, and listened. There was breathing, small, controlled, deliberately quiet. The child was awake. The guard did not approach immediately. He scanned the room for signs of recent presence, a faint crease in the carpet near the wardrobe, a chair drawn back an inch farther than regulation allowed, the nursery monitor angled away from the crib by a fraction. None of it suggested chaos, all of it suggested intention. His jaw tightened imperceptibly as he stepped into the child's line of sight. Prince George sat upright, blanket clutched to his chest, eyes fixed not on the guard, but on the door behind him, as if measuring distance. The guard lowered himself slightly, maintaining space, offering no sudden movement. He did not speak. He did not need to. The child's grip loosened just enough to show the tension had been noticed. The guard's gaze returned to the room, tracing the path someone would have taken to enter, to stand, to leave. The absence of the log entry pressed heavier now, no longer an administrative error, but a deliberate omission. He activated his body camera without sound, the internal system logging the time automatically, and adjusted his position so the lens captured the doorway, the child, and the surrounding space. Protocol required immediate reporting of irregular access. Protocol also required certainty. He had neither proof nor accusation yet, only a convergence of details that refused to settle. He waited, counting seconds, letting the quiet stretch, feeling the faint chill rising from the stone floor through the soles of his boots, aware that once he crossed the threshold, the morning would no longer remain ordinary. The guard held his position at the nursery threshold as footsteps approached from the corridor, their cadence unhurried, confident, carrying the soft echo of authority accustomed to unchallenged passage. He did not turn immediately. Instead, he shifted his weight just enough to remain square to the room, ensuring the child stayed within his peripheral vision. The senior royal entered without pause, the scent of cologne preceding him, sharp against the nursery's muted air. His presence altered the room's balance at once, not through volume or gesture, but through an impatience that showed in the way his eyes moved, quick, assessing, dismissive. He addressed the guard with a nod rather than words, gaze already sliding past him toward the crib. The guard responded with the same restraint, offering no greeting, no explanation, simply standing as regulation allowed. The child stiffened. The blanket tightened in small hands. The senior royal stepped closer, his stride shortening as he neared the crib, and the guard noticed the subtle change in posture, shoulders squared, jaw set, a faint tightening in the forearm as the hand curled inward. Nothing overt, nothing actionable, but enough to register. The senior royal spoke then, voice low, clipped, questioning the guard's presence with an implied rebuke rather than a direct challenge. The guard answered minimally, citing routine checks, his tone even, his words precise. The exchange lasted seconds, but the air thickened, as if pressure had been applied from multiple sides. The senior royal's eyes flicked to the camera housing in the corner, then back to the guard, lingering a fraction too long. He shifted position, placing himself closer to the child than necessary, and reached out, not to touch, but close enough that the child recoiled. The guard noted the reaction, the way the boy's breathing hitched, the way his gaze dropped. Surveillance indicators remained steady, their quiet hum almost intrusive. The senior royal withdrew his hand, fingers flexing once as if releasing tension, and exhaled through his nose. He spoke again, this time with a hint of irritation, suggesting the child be left alone, suggesting the guard had overstepped. The guard did not move. He felt the weight of rank pressing in, the expectation of deference, the unspoken reminder of hierarchy. He kept his eyes level, his stance unchanged, aware that every camera, every reflective surface, every second of silence was recording more than sound. The tension remained unbroken, suspended, waiting for someone to resolve it. The senior royal circled slightly, repositioning himself between the crib and the window, and for a brief moment his composure slipped, revealed in the tight line of his mouth and the sharp intake of breath he did not fully suppress. The guard tracked the movement without turning his head, relying on reflection and instinct, cataloging the shift as one more detail in a growing ledger. The child's blanket slipped from his grasp and fell to the floor, the soft fabric landing soundlessly, yet the noise seemed loud in the stillness. The senior royal bent to retrieve it, his movement abrupt, and the guard saw the child flinch, shoulders drawing inward. That reaction, more than any gesture, sharpened the moment. The guard stepped forward a half pace, not blocking, simply present, and the senior royal straightened, eyes narrowing. Their gazes met then, briefly, and the guard recognized something there, not malice, but impatience edged with entitlement, a certainty that resistance was an inconvenience rather than a boundary. The senior royal's voice cooled as he questioned procedure, questioned the guard's judgment, his words carefully chosen to remain within acceptable limits. The guard responded with facts only, the open door, the missing log, the need for verification. He did not accuse, he did not suggest, he stated. The senior royal laughed softly once, a sound devoid of humor, and gestured dismissively toward the cameras, implying oversight, implying that nothing of consequence could occur under watch. The guard noted the emphasis, the reliance on appearances. As if to reinforce the point, the senior royal's hand rose again, this time brushing the air near the child's shoulder, a fleeting motion that the cameras might capture only as a blur. The guard saw it clearly. His body reacted before his mind fully articulated the risk, muscles tensed, stance adjusted, attention narrowed. He felt the familiar pull of protocol urging restraint, reminding him of chain of command, of consequences measured not in moments but in careers. He also felt the immediacy of the space, the smallness of the child, the narrowing options. The senior royal straightened once more, expression reset, and issued a quiet instruction for the guard to step outside. The words were calm, the implication was not. The guard did not answer immediately. He glanced at the child, saw the boy's eyes fixed on the doorway, calculating escape in a room designed for safety. The guard's radio vibrated faintly at his side, an incoming routine check, unanswered. He inhaled slowly, the scent of polished wood and fabric filling his lungs, and understood that whatever choice he made next would be visible, recorded, and irreversible. He remained where he was, silence stretching again, the tension now no longer unseen, but contained, waiting for release.
The guard moved when the senior royal's hand crossed the last invisible boundary, not with force, but with certainty, stepping into the narrow space between authority and consequence as if it had always been his place to stand. He caught the wrist mid-motion, fingers firm, pressure precise, enough to stop without causing pain, a technique drilled for restraint without spectacle. The room seemed to contract around them. The senior royal froze, surprise registering first, then offense, his breath audible now, sharp and quick. The guard did not speak. He did not look at the hand he held. His gaze remained steady, angled downward toward the child, whose breathing had stilled in shock rather than fear. Cameras hummed softly. Light shifted as a cloud passed the window, dulling the room by a shade. The senior royal tested the grip once, subtly, and found it unyielding. This was not insubordination in posture or tone. It was procedure applied where it was not meant to be seen. The guard released the wrist as soon as the motion ceased, stepping back half a pace to re-establish distance, as if the contact had been incidental. The senior royal straightened his sleeve, eyes hard, mouth set, and for a moment neither of them moved. The guard cited a safety pause, his voice low, measured, framed as compliance with child protection protocols rather than defiance. He positioned himself again between the child and the adult, body angled to shield without declaring it. The senior royal responded with a warning masked as instruction, invoking hierarchy without naming it, reminding the guard of his station. The guard listened, acknowledged with a brief nod, and did not retreat. The temperature in the room felt colder now, the controlled environment suddenly noticeable against exposed skin. The child shifted, drawing his knees closer, the smallest movement signaling relief more than fear. The guard registered it and held his ground, aware that every second extended the rupture, that silence here was louder than any argument. The senior royal exhaled slowly, recalibrating, and stepped back toward the window, restoring the physical order of the room, even as the balance of power remained unsettled. He spoke again, more carefully this time, framing his presence as concerned, his actions as misinterpreted, his authority as protective rather than intrusive. The guard absorbed the words without reaction, noting how the narrative adjusted itself to fit observation. He requested, formally now, that another attendant be present, that the log discrepancy be addressed before the morning schedule advanced. It was a small escalation, procedural, difficult to refuse without drawing attention.
The senior royal's eyes flicked once more to the camera, then to the guard, calculation evident in the pause before assent. He agreed, tersely, and moved toward the door, his steps measured, composure restored in increments. At the threshold he stopped, turned slightly, and issued a final remark, quiet, pointed, about discretion. The guard acknowledged it with the same neutral professionalism he applied to all directives, neither agreeing nor challenging. When the door closed, the room seemed to release a fraction of its tension. The guard knelt beside the crib, adjusting the fallen blanket and returning it to the child's grasp without comment. The boy accepted it, fingers curling into the fabric, eyes no longer fixed on escape, but on the guard's sleeve, the insignia there steady and familiar. The guard remained until the child's breathing settled into a slower rhythm, then rose and activated his radio, reporting a routine delay and requesting supervisory presence. His tone was unremarkable, the language precise. Outside the nursery, footsteps approached again, the palace resuming its quiet choreography. Inside, the guard stood watch, aware that the line he had crossed could not be uncrossed, that protocol would soon demand explanation, review, judgment. He felt no triumph, no relief, only the steady weight of responsibility, recalibrated, heavier now, but aligned with the reason he had taken the oath in the first place. The guard guided the child from the nursery with a calm that did not invite attention, his hand resting lightly at the boy's shoulder blade, enough to direct without urging, enough to reassure without display. The corridor beyond was brighter now, morning fully established, staff moving at regulated intervals, each step part of a system that relied on things remaining ordinary. He matched his pace to the child's shorter stride, adjusting instinctively when the boy hesitated at the threshold, eyes flicking once toward the closed door behind them. The guard did not look back. He angled them toward a service route rather than the main passage, citing efficiency to the approaching supervisor, who fell in step without question. As they walked, the guard's senses remained active, noting the placement of cameras, the reflections in glass panels, the presence of witnesses who were not witnesses at all unless called upon to be. He spoke quietly to the supervisor, requesting a temporary holding space under the pretext of schedule adjustment, his language precise, procedural, unremarkable. The child's grip tightened briefly on the blanket when a distant voice rose, then loosened as the guard slowed, allowing him to regain balance. At the designated room, neutral and sparsely furnished, the guard positioned the child near the interior wall, away from the door, and signaled for an attendant he trusted to remain nearby. He activated a discrete timestamp on his internal recorder, marking the transition without labeling it. The palace continued to breathe around them, doors opening, carts rolling, routines resuming, but the guard felt the subtle shift of exposure, the knowledge that movement itself was now part of the record. He maintained outward obedience, answering questions with measured clarity, offering no narrative beyond what was required, aware that restraint here was as critical as action had been moments before. When he stepped back into the corridor alone, the guard allowed himself a single controlled breath, the air cooler here, carrying the faint metallic scent of cleaning agents and polished railings. He moved toward a security console positioned just off the main route, its screen angled to avoid casual view, and began documenting in fragments rather than conclusions, times, positions, observed behaviors, discrepancies in access logs. He did not name intent. He did not assign motive. He let the details speak in sequence, knowing that accuracy was his strongest protection. As he worked, he caught a glimpse of the senior royal at the far end of the corridor, already reabsorbed into the palace's flow, posture composed, expression neutral, the earlier tension sealed behind practiced control. Their eyes did not meet. The guard finished the entry and encrypted it for delayed release, a measure permitted under safeguarding protocols, but rarely used. He closed the console and resumed his patrol, posture unchanged, greeting staff as required, the insignia on his sleeve catching light with each turn. Somewhere behind a secured door, the child was being settled, soothed by routine, unaware of the careful perimeter now drawn around him. The guard passed beneath another camera, its lens tracking smoothly, and felt the quiet accumulation of consequence building without sound. Nothing outward had broken, no alarms had sounded, yet the palace, for him, no longer felt seamless. Each corridor now carried an added layer, each interaction a potential vector. He accepted it without resentment, understanding that control sometimes meant allowing the system to move, while ensuring, silently, that it could not erase what had been seen.
The guard reviewed the footage in the low-lit security office long after the corridor traffic had thinned, the palace settling into its late morning rhythm, screens casting a pale glow across the desk as he moved frame by frame with deliberate restraint. He did not search for drama, he searched for continuity. The camera outside the nursery showed the door angle changing by degrees, the toy appearing where it had not been minutes earlier, the absence of a recorded entry aligning precisely with a brief system latency that had already been explained away in a routine maintenance memo. Inside the room, the footage revealed nothing overt, only proximity, posture, timing. But when layered together, the pattern tightened. He noted how often the senior royal positioned himself between the child and exits, how his hand entered frame and left again, just below the threshold of clarity, how the child's body language shifted seconds before any adult movement was visible. The guard logged each instance without annotation, letting timestamps and angles do the work words could not. Outside the office, footsteps passed, voices murmured, life continuing in polished normalcy. He felt no urgency now, only a controlled patience, the kind developed over years of understanding that resolution in such places was rarely immediate and never loud. When he finished, he secured the file and initiated a formal report, routing it through safeguarding channels designed to move slowly but irreversibly, their strength in procedure rather than speed. He stood, adjusted his uniform, and returned to duty, passing the nursery once more. Through the partially open door he saw the child asleep, chest rising evenly, the blanket pulled close, an attendant seated nearby, posture relaxed. The guard paused only long enough to confirm the rhythm of breathing, then moved on, the weight of what he carried shifting from immediate risk to sustained vigilance. By afternoon, the palace had absorbed the morning's irregularities without visible disturbance. Meetings held, schedules maintained, authority projecting continuity as it always did. Yet the guard sensed the subtle recalibration beneath the surface. Access permissions updated quietly. Patrol routes adjusted by fractions. A request for clarification routed through official channels with language careful enough to signal attention without accusation. He answered when asked, repeating only what he had documented, his tone unchanged, his account consistent. There were no confrontations, no acknowledgments of fault, only the slow tightening of oversight that followed when patterns could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. As evening approached, the guard completed his final sweep,
light shifting warmer along the stone walls, shadows lengthening in familiar places. He passed beneath the nursery window and heard nothing but the soft hum of climate control, the sound of safety restored through routine rather than announcement. He understood that the outcome might never be publicly named, that responsibility in such spaces often manifested as prevention rather than correction, absence rather than exposure. It was enough. He filed his final note, locked his equipment, and took his position for the night watch, posture steady, gaze alert, accepting that the resolution he had secured was quiet by design. Somewhere above, the child slept on, unaware of the thin margins that had protected him, and the guard remained at his post, prepared to notice again should the smallest detail ever fall out of place.